welcome to the this is the third session, right, on psychology. Okay. Before I dive in, there was one thing that I wanted to clarify from the last presentation. We did something called, what we did was called the thematic apperception test. Okay, and this is what I meant by the Rorschach ink blot test. So just want to make clear that distinction, because I saw in Ashwini's email that she said that we had done the Rorschach ink blot test. That's not what we did. So we actually worked on the thematic, it's called TAT, right? The thematic apperception test. Okay, so I'll just clarify that. So that's why I added that extra slide in the presentation to show you what the Rorschach ink blot test is. Typically we don't share those ink blot images, and it has been kept like that for a long time, but now with the internet it's very hard to control what people do, and some random stupid person has posted it on the internet, and now that test has been compromised severely, because people will look at that test and I'm going to play with this, and I'm going to imagine this and imagine that, and then if that person goes to a psychologist and the psychologist cannot get a good read on that person's psyche, because that test is already out there, they've already seen the image, and they've already formed an opinion on it. And so it's not a spontaneous response in the test. So anyway, just wanted to clear that out. Any burning questions, anything that you went away like totally confused and kind of couldn't sleep all week, worrying about it, anything like that? Or you're like, thank God that is over with. Whatever your reaction, just want to hear. Any thoughts?
About the last class?
Yeah, the last class or the last two classes.
So
all over your head.
It was a new topic for me. I never heard. So in a way it was good because something new, but in many ways it was.
Okay.
So basically, I remember the pictures you showed me, like about how you want to you asked us to tell story with other partner.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay. So that experiential activity stayed with you more than the lecture material. Yeah, that's normal. That's how it is. But anything else strike you as unusual or strike you as discordant? Something you're like, no, this is wrong, or this is whatever.
yeah, if you engage the
Contradictory.
audience, right? So basically, it won't go over that.
No, I was asking for was there anything contradictory, like anything that you just vehemently disagreed with or vehemently was very uncomfortable with?
One thing that happened to me was, I'm so glad that last class, early on you mentioned that put all your yoga stuff in your background, don't bring that here. So it was for me a little bit difficult, because like the horses are running very fast, I had to drag them back.
Yes.
I had to put
Yes.
brakes on that.
Yes.
So from that sense, like when inadvertently I try to compare that, I see so much
Sure.
difference.
So was that
That was a good
issue
thing,
for me,
because
or was it a good thing?
the learning was easier, because
okay.
it means everything is not what's there in yoga is
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
The contrasts are very striking.
Yes, yeah. Good. I'm glad that worked for you, because in the first class I think we tried to do that whole thing, and then I think Ashwini pointed out to me after the class that it gets a little heavy because you haven't learned the psychology part. So then how will you integrate, right? You can't integrate if you only learned the yoga part, you haven't learned the other part. How are you going to integrate? So yeah, sorry.
No, I haven't gone to any slides yet. I'm sorry.
No, I haven't shared. I'm still editing.
You haven't shared any?
I haven't shared with your batch. I think I've shared with the older batches.
You could, because then now
Yeah.
I was thinking this week I will go all
Yeah.
whenever we go to.
Yeah, I think now they're kind of ready.
So and then going
Yeah.
on. That's how we will. Otherwise
Yes.
it's like.
Yeah.
No, I don't
It
remember.
is.
In fact, I'll be posting an assignment on that. The slides and the assignment will be posted.
Yeah.
That will make it
Yes.
very much
Yeah.
mandatory
Yeah.
for you to read and answer.
Yeah.
Only when you read and answer the questions, it
Yeah.
becomes yours. So that is why We are waiting because she's still working on those and delivering the content and whatnot. After that, the assignment will be posted.
How about the anatomy one? Is the answer?
Same thing is going to happen with
Is
anatomy
not yet,
also.
I'll
have
send it.
yeah. Overview has, I think we have already posted, but yeah, we'll be doing all of that. Next, expect some 2-3 assignments, very serious assignments.
So have you decided what assignment you're going to give them?
You and
So-
I will decide what.
Oh, we
assignment.
will decide later, okay. Because I have some things in mind. Right?
I have some questions in already with me, but we can work together.
Oh, presentation. Great, thank you. All right, so now I have to learn how to use this gizmo. Okay, so we started off with, where did we leave off last time? Does anyone remember where we left off?
Freud, yeah.
Okay, so the unconscious mind, right? So what I'm going to do, how do I do this? Yes. I can't swipe.
Oh, you can.
Oh, I can?
You mean that?
Okay. Okay, so
Apple
we,
is too difficult
I know.
of an interface.
no, it's actually easy. It's
No, I meant sarcastic.
So you have to be sold one.
Steve
Huh?
Jobs will
Yeah.
commit suicide once
So
again.
we went through all
Very
these.
sad.
These are the topics. We didn't do sleep, but we talked about affect. We talked about the personality models, extroversion and introversion, right? So I'm just kind of refreshing your memory here by going back to the slides. So we talked about this, and then now we these are like basically just the chronologically listed the different various psychologists. You don't have to memorize these names or anything like that, but you can just go back and look at it just out of curiosity to see who are all the famous names. And we kind of talked about this a little bit, the evolution of Western philosophy and the way the Western philosophy evolved influenced Western psychology, right? So where do you get, where are we doing our yoga therapy from? I mean, we're basically getting it from the thousands of years of evolution of yoga psychology that is now, informing the practices that we are doing and the philosophy that we are following and the methodology. So it's similar to that. And the thing that I touched on was basically the dualism, this aspect of dualism of how the psyche or the soul was held separate from the body. And from that emerged the idea that the brain creates the consciousness. In fact, that is such an entrenched idea that it's the brain that creates the human consciousness, that for a long time science had rejected anything metaphysical, anything beyond empirical. Like empirical means what? What you can get from the five senses. What you can taste, smell, touch, see, hear. And what you can observe, also what you can observe through instrumentation, which is also part of seeing. Like, even if you look at something in a microscope, that's also seeing. Or you test something with an instrument and you get the results, that's also empirical. Anything beyond empirical was rejected. So for a long time, people hadn't actually gone into the mind to look at what's happening in the mind, because it is considered like this metaphysical thing which is related more to the soul. And we talked about how the church, for a long time, for many centuries, the domain of the church was the soul, right? It's like, we're going to save your soul, we're going to get you to heaven. Once this body dies, this is what's going to happen to you, and so be good, do good, and so there was the philosophy was more informed by the church's injunctions, religious injunctions, and there wasn't so much of a free thinking, forget the church, let's just think for ourselves. There wasn't so much of that. And then when science started coming up, it kind of broke away from that whole religious thing, but it couldn't completely break away. All it could do was it said, okay, we're going to just study the body. The body has nothing to do with the soul. And the body belongs to nature. And we'll just study the body and we will treat the body. So medicine kind of got confined to just the body, and this whole aspect of treating the mind didn't evolve as much. So I'm just trying to draw this contrast because in Eastern systems, every educational system, every thought, any system related to medicine or sociology or anything, incorporated the soul, the body, everything, right? The spiritual aspect, the physical aspect, emotional, everything is all considered part of human experience. There wasn't this sort of separation or dichotomy. Unfortunately, in the West, that dichotomy did happen, and the evolution of medicine proceeded along that line. And psychology was also influenced by that because it kind of followed the it's called the biological model of medicine. Now, then humanism kind of came along, and the reason I touched on humanism is because these two things inform how psychology works today. So on the one hand, you have the biological model, and then on the other hand, you also have this humanistic approach, because you still want to consider the human as the entity that has that agency, that has the free will, and that is independent and individual. So these are the two concepts, these are the two big ideas that influenced the field of psychology. So, I mean, don't worry too much about it, because I will come into the humanistic approach of psychotherapy, which will explain to you a little more, what that means. And then this is basically, I was talking about the humanistic manifesto, which is a manifesto is just simply like a declaration of this is who we are and this is what we believe. You just put it, they just put it out there saying, hey, this is how we're going to live. This is what we believe. These are the values that we live by, and this is what guides our work. Okay, so then I put that up there, just FYI. Then we came to the psychoanalytic approach to personality, and this is where Freud comes in, and he's an Austrian physician and psychologist, and he's the one who propounded. Now, he didn't do this in a vacuum. He didn't propound the unconscious mind in a vacuum. There were other people who influenced his thinking, because nobody just suddenly comes up like that. I mean, it's very, very few. Most people are influenced by their field and by their peers and by their predecessors. Now, he did not believe that there is any such thing as free will. So we have to understand that this is approaching it from his perspective, what he thinks mind is. And he believed that the component of the personality, I'm going to show you this other picture here, which will make it clear, a little clearer. The unconscious mind is like, the mind is like an iceberg. There's only a little bit that is available to our consciousness. Most of it is unconscious. And we talked about the id and superego, right? So this will help you understand what that is. So basically what I talked about is, this is the id, which is, do you see the pointer there? Let me see. So the id here is all these impulses that we have, right? These are the fears, we have unacceptable sexual desires, violent motives towards violence, irrational wishes, immoral urges. You can see how dark and kind of negative this whole thing sounds, right? This all this stuff is in the id. Selfish needs, shame, trauma, all of that is there in the needs. And our instincts, our basic human instincts, natural human instincts are in the id. Also our, all of that is in the id. So that's all in the line below, right? Then the superego is not shown in this one, but here you can see that the superego, part of it is above the water and most of it is below the water. So for example, if you are in a situation where you want to help someone, there is a part of you that's helping that person because you're consciously aware that you want to help, but there's also a big part of you that is programmed to help people. You're programmed by your culture, your parents, your upbringing, your teachers. Be nice, share, help. So there is that programming. So it is a combination. It's a combination of that unconscious stuff and the conscious stuff. And same thing with the ego also. The way, like I told you, the ego is the one that operates in the world, right? So the ego is also partly available to you and partly hidden from you. I'm just going back and forth. Maybe I'll just stay on this slide. So you can see that the ego here, there is a part here that's not available to you, and there is this part that is available to your, like you know what's going on. You know how you're behaving. Like that's the part that when you do this awareness practice, where you try to be aware, like the Sakshi Bhava, right? So you're trying to be aware of what you are doing. That's the white part. Now, when you exercise, so I apologize for bringing in this yoga stuff, right? But I feel like that is a language through which I can explain this to you. So I'm not trying to compare, I'm just trying to help you understand. Okay, so we're not going to go into yoga, we're going to kind of bring a little bit just to help you get the concepts. I want you to understand the concept the way Freud imagined it. Okay? So there is something called the pre-conscious. The pre-conscious is something that is not available to you but can be made available to you. And this is important because what happens is there are times when we are on autopilot, and that's the sort of the combination of the white part and the blue part. But we want to get more into the blue part. And when we practice, when we are practicing or when we are in a psychoanalytic session with the therapist is trying to get us into this blue part to figure out what's going on there. And mainly you go to the therapist because you're in distress and you're having some problem and you're trying to figure out how to solve it. Now, so there is this layer of pre-conscious that is available to us that we can access if we put some effort. So if we put some effort and use the help of the therapist, then we become aware of that. Now, to become aware of something deep down here takes a lot of work, right? So there are things in the surface level that we can be made aware of. So that was his concept. And so when he got people on a chair, like on the couch, he would have them do something called free association. Or he would have them tell him about his dreams. And he would analyze the dreams. And the dreams have what's called manifest content and latent content. Now, I'll just give you some example of a dream. Like you are running, and then you suddenly come to the edge of a cliff, and you stop, and you're like super scared, and you're like, oh my God, what if I had taken a few steps forward and I would have fallen off the cliff? And you're just standing at the edge of that cliff. That is a manifest content. Now the latent content is up to the therapist's interpretation. And that will depend on that person's life, what's going on in that person's life at that point, and why that particular thing came up in their dream. Maybe they want to start a new business and they're afraid that they're going to fail in the business. So falling off that cliff is a fear of failure. But the running and the reaching to that point is they're probably motivated to move forward, but then they see this cliff and they can't move beyond that cliff. So there is maybe they have a mental block. Again, it's completely really up to the analyst and what is going on with that patient at that point. So do you understand what I'm saying? So when you say, if someone tells you that, oh yeah, I've had this dream that I was running and then there's this cliff and all that, we'll be like, oh, did you go to Grand Canyon recently? That's probably what will come up, because we focus on the manifest content, we focus on the obvious things. But because they're trying to look at this place here. They're trying to go below the water. below the waterline to see what is really going on behind the scene. Okay, any questions?
So you're saying that the job of the psychologist or
The therapist, yeah, analyst.
analyst is to go in that blue zone and figure
To
out
take,
what's going on?
to take the patient to that blue zone. Because the patient will tell the analyst what is going on, right?
Okay.
But so they analyze it and then they present it back. So what happens is they ask the patient to free associate, they talk about stuff, and they tell the patient to relax and to just talk whatever comes up, say whatever comes up. Then the analyst is sort of like the sakshi. The analyst is a neutral witness who witnesses whatever the patient is saying, and then they analyze it and present it back to the patient. And then the patient then takes it and then becomes aware of it. So they're making the patient aware of things that they are unable to be aware of. Like we cannot know what we don't know. You see? So that's the process. That's the process of analysis that they do.
I had a question. So, you gave the example of someone who's coming from that blue zone, the unconscious mind, when they're trying to be good, because the society has trained them to be that way. Could a similar argument apply even for kids? For example, they have done some studies that I have read about, like 2-year-old kids. They immediately, instinctually go and help people who are in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So we cannot say they have been trained, but it's still there in the blue part. So where does that come from?
So remember, I am Freud, and you are asking me, right? I'm not answering you as Savitha. I'm answering you as Freud. Freud will say, I don't believe in free will. And what he will say is that when I was a baby and I cried, my mom came to me. That is what I'm doing to others. And they actually do, they have a whole theory based on like the attachment theory and how people grow up and how they relate to their attachment figures and how that informs the personalities and the characters that develops. So there's a whole theory, there's a whole area of treatment and everything in that area. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
How about a child like 2 years? Okay, they understand. Mother came and helped.
No,
Okay.
they don't.
No.
I'm saying their 2 years is still a pre-verbal stage.
So how about 13 months old baby? Is the same like 2 years?
Does a 13-month-old help other babies?
Yeah, I mean, help means, it's my own grandchild.
They
correct?
empathize.
Empathize.
They empathize. Because they sense the other person's distress, but their motivation to help comes a little later
Yeah.
when they develop agency. They develop some cognitive abilities and some agency. But very small babies, like if you have a bunch of little babies in a daycare, one baby starts crying, they all start crying, right? That is just simply that harmonic, the mirror neurons, the harmonic vibration that they empathize with each other. So Freud would basically say that there is no such thing as free will, there is no such thing as intrinsic goodness. It's all in the unconscious, it's all from the superego, it's a programming, and most people just, they're driven by their unconscious motivations. So it's kind of dark and negative, but you have to understand that the times that he was dealing with in that time, that was a theory that he could apply because that's what he empirically saw in people. People were behaving like that, and he just assumed that that's how people are because he hadn't traveled to Eastern countries or to tribal lands and look. He hadn't. Okay, in science there is something called, in social science there's something called external validity, right? Even in empirical sciences, external validity. External validity is how valid is your theory applied outside the population that you studied it in. That external validity is very poor for Freud's, right? So do you guys know what that means? So let's say you take a certain population and you do a bunch of research studies and you come to some conclusions. And then you say, oh, this is a universal truth. No, it's not, because it's only done with that population. What you have to do is then take your conclusions and apply it to another population and see if it matches, if you still get the same results. Then you can say, oh, it's universally true. Or actually not even, like you have to apply it across the world in many different kinds of populations. So that's why this is, you have to take this in context. Then he also came up with these stages of development. And he had a theory of that sexual drive, that the sexual drive really weaves through all the stages of development, right from the babyhood. And his idea of sexual drive was not necessarily the way we think about sexual drive. We think from adult perspective, we think from physical attraction perspective, but he had a slightly more subtle approach to this concept of sexual drive, and we don't have to get into that. It's just that he's misunderstood. That's what I'm trying to say. So what he said is that there is a pleasure principle that we are attracted to, and from the baby stage we seek pleasure, right? That's an instinctual drive, is to seek pleasure in the world. And the babies from birth to 18 months, they seek pleasure in oral satisfaction, drinking from the mother's breast, or feeding from the bottle, or even eating foods. That's where their pleasure comes from. And then 18 months to 3 years, they get pleasure from the bowel movements and their bladder elimination. And now in European society, there was a very strict toilet training would happen at that age. And it was done in a very harsh way, it was done in a very kind of shaming way. So that affected a lot of people at that very young age. And those impressions, they actually carry into their adulthood. And that is what was Freud's logic. And then from 3 to 6 years, there's a phallic stage where children seek pleasure from their genitals, and the conflict that they have with their desire for the opposite sex parent, which all sounds really weird. It's like, what the hell is he talking about? It's just so bizarre, right? But again, coming from Freud's perspective, it's more of, he's looking at what is motivating people, where is their energy, where is the drive coming from, and where is pleasure coming from for them. And then so he has this is the psychosocial, he's got this developmental scheme based on his view of where people seek pleasure and what motivates them. And then you have the latency stage, which is the 6 years to puberty, where you kind of, he says that it kind of goes, latent means something that just kind of goes underground and it stays unmanifest. So at that point, they don't manifest anything sexual, but then once they hit puberty, that whole sexual drive just like comes out in like a whoosh at that stage, and then puberty and older. So he doesn't nuance it beyond puberty. Like once person reaches puberty, basically that's now they're kind of fixed. Their development is done. At least the psychosexual development is done. Okay, so I'm not gonna. This is just to let you know, because a lot of terminology that we use, oh, that person is so anal, right? It kind of comes from this, where that person means that person is kind of hung up at that stage. And the theory here is that if at every stage there is a crisis, and the person has to, the organism meaning like the baby, has to solve that crisis. It's a psychological crisis. And they have to solve that crisis and then emerge through that and develop through that. It's sort of like a rebirth happens at every stage. So you get through this crisis of the oral stage, then you come out of it. So his theory is that people who have either been breastfed for too long, or who have not been breastfed enough, or who haven't satisfied their oral urges, they end up becoming, I don't know, either they don't talk, or they become compulsive eaters, or they talk too much. There's like some people just like blah, 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 and they talk about everything. And so they use that oral part of their personality to express something that they couldn't resolve in the conflict in the early age. And you know, that's, so again, theory, right? Now, theory requires research and empirical, you know, you have to establish it empirically and the treatment for that. But it's impossible to prove. These things, it's impossible to research. How would you go back and research whether a baby was orally satisfied or not? Right? It's a subjective experience of that baby. So all you can do is you can just correlate and say, okay, I have this theory and I have these set of patients and I'm going to apply this theory on them, and 80% of them got cured. Yay, the theory works. Again, external validity, you know, is it valid for all populations? Is it, you know, was it really your theory that solved that problem for them, or was there something else that you did that maybe you didn't factor in? So it's the main objection to Freud's whole theory was that it's scientifically not possible to research. Just cannot figure out scientifically what's happening with his theories. But it's very interesting. If you think about it, he just has this. He was one of the first few people who got in and started looking at these things in a subtle manner. So you have to understand that until then it was very sledgehammer kind of approach. But this subtlety, he kind of brought into that field. Okay? One of the most important contributions, besides the unconscious mind, the defense mechanisms, that is the most important contribution that he made. So what are these defense mechanisms? I'll just give you an overview, and you can kind of read up there, and we'll do a little exercise also. So first one is displacement. Actually, I'll have one of you guys read it. Whoever can see, read the first one for me. Anyone who can see, read across, like read displacement, read the diverting da da da, and read a student who's angry da da da, like read the example.
So displacement, diverting threatening impulses away from the source of anxiety and toward a more acceptable source. And possible behavior example, a student who is angry at the professor for a low grade lashes out at roommate who is a safer target of her anger.
Okay. So a defense mechanism is something that you use to reduce your own anxiety. So there is something that happens in your life that creates stress, right? And you have to respond to it, like you have to react to it. But you are conditioned to not react. You can't just react anyway, right? You are conditioned to react in certain ways because of the superego and the ego clash. So you find a safe way of reacting, and you employ these defense mechanisms. And why are they called defense mechanisms? Is because it's defending your ego. You are defending yourself, right? And you are soothing yourself also at the same time. So it is adaptive, and it keeps you intact, but it is something that can cause problems for others. It can cause problems for you also, but it's universal. This is one of the universal things. So let's read through all of them and take turns and just read through all of them, and then we'll do a little exercise. Okay, next one. I mean, was this understood? The displacement is understood, right? Okay, next one.
Projection. Disguising threatening impulses by attributing them to others. A man with powerful unconscious sexual desires for women claims that women use him as a sex object.
Okay, sit with that for some time. It's a little harder to understand than the displacement one, but it's a very, very powerful one. Projection is a very powerful defense mechanism, very common.
Very common.
No, I'm just having you sit with it for some time. Do you understand it? Do you get it? Again, you have to go into the latent stuff.
The sexual thing, or it could be any example.
It could be anything.
What's confusing is the sexual example there, so everybody's confused what it is. But
It could be anything. It is not necessarily a
man
sexual
who is
thing.
who is corrupt maybe.
Mm-hmm.
He assumes that the everybody around him is that way.
Yeah.
I mean, what is confusing is the examples of probably people others.
That's why I want you to sit with it, and that's why you came up with the right analysis, right? Because
I can't understand what that man would be going through, but I can understand this.
exactly. So I just want you to understand the concept. Yeah, you may not understand that particular example, but it's what's important is to understand the projection concept. Next one. Who wants to read? Whoever can see the slide.
Rationalization of it. Generating self-justifying explanations for our negative behaviors. A drama student convinces herself that getting the part in the play wasn't that important after all.
So
What is
great.
that? What story does that remind you of?
So great.
Okay.
Actually, I'm unable to see the difference between this one and the projection, because in both they are trying to change the context, and because even the previous example, it was a rationalization, trying to put the root cause from them to somebody else.
Yes, but there is a specific way in which you do that rationalization that results in a projection. Do you understand?
So you're saying projection is a subset of rationalization?
Not necessarily, because there are other ways of doing projection which doesn't involve rationalization, which is actually irrational.
I see.
Projection can be an irrational response also, right? And remember that all this is coming from the unconscious mind. So by definition, these behaviors are irrational to the observer, not to the doer, and that's the beauty of it, right? Okay, next one. Reaction formation. Who wants to read?
Making unacceptable motivations appear at their what is that? Exact opposite. Jane is sexually attracted to friend Jack, but she claims the public that she intensely dislikes him.
Oh dear. Sorry, let me just get this. Hello? Yeah, can you call Daddy, please? I'm in the class. Just text him. He's at home. You just give it a few minutes, or start walking, and he'll pick you up on the way. Oh yeah. Figure it out with him, please. I can take you later if he doesn't. Okay? Yeah. I'm in class. Bye. I don't know. Sorry. Okay. Where are we? Reaction formation. Do you guys get what that means? Can someone explain it to me?
The typical Ms. and Moon scenario, if everybody
Very good example. Yeah. So she's talking about Milton Boone, which was like the romance novels, where the girl is like actually attracted to the guy, but then she's like, oh, I hate him so much. And so what is happening there? So we'll take that example. So the girl is attracted to him, but she doesn't want to be attracted to him, right? And she thinks it's a bad thing to be attracted to that person because she has formed a negative image about that guy. And instead of being true to herself, instead of truthfully saying, yeah, there's some things about him I don't like, but in spite of that, I am attracted to him. That would be a truthful way of presenting that. Instead, she says, ugh, I hate that guy. Because she's actually disliking part of herself that is attracted to him, and she's trying to push that part away. And instead of being honest and authentic, she's dumping on the guy. Do you get that?
Or could it be like she is afraid of the rejection that he may not
That too.
Being the
That
mother of a teenager, I can identify. I mean, a preteen who is going into teenage now. I can see my daughter making statements like that.
They do all of this. We do all of this. We do all of this.
Actually, I read it a little bit differently.
Okay.
Because it says that she claims in public that she's not, because if others have a negative opinion of this guy, then she doesn't want to admit to others that she likes him. So she's not really trying to push a part of herself away, because fully she likes him, but then
Wait,
because
fully
of,
she?
there is no conflict within her.
Oh, this is absolutely about with the conflict within. All the defense mechanisms are employed because to resolve a conflict within.
But then she
But then
tells in
why?
public.
Yeah,
Okay, so-
anybody, yeah.
So she wants validation in public
I see.
So, by talking
because
about
she
love,
has this she has this conflict within. She's not getting validation within, and there's a conflict. So in public, she tells how she actually dislikes that guy. She hates that guy to kind of validate to resolve that conflict within her. It's a way for her to resolve that
It's like
conflict.
lying to herself.
She's lying to herself.
But
It's
actually, she
inauthentic.
likes that guy, right? Actually, she likes the guy.
But that's the conflict.
attracted.
That's the conflict.
So confusing.
All the Hindi movies, right? Also,
Hindi movies, like, to saying strengthen your own
Yeah.
convictions.
I hate that guy.
Yeah. To strengthen
That's
your
what
own
I hate, yes.
So what you have to understand is she's not allowed to like that guy.
Ah.
There's a part of her that's saying that is inappropriate. I'm not allowed. So that again, that's the superego. So the id is the one that's attracted. That's attraction cannot be controlled. I mean, it's the id, it's instinct. But the superego is like, no, that guy, you should not be liking that guy, and there's a conflict. So it's the way that they resolve that conflict. Okay. Then next one. Regression. Anyone wants to read? Whoever is closer to the screen, I guess.
Retreating to an earlier, more childlike and safer stage of development. A college student who is worried about an important test begins to suck on his finger.
Does that make sense? This is one of the easier ones, actually.
or just hold out for blanket.
Yeah. Yeah. But then it can happen in more subtle ways also. It can happen in more subtle ways. Have you seen how kids react, little kids react when you take away their toy, right? What do? Throw tantrum. Have you seen adults throwing tantrum?
No, maybe they do. Different ways.
Yes.
They throw things, bang doors.
We don't call it a tantrum. We think it is. We don't call it a tantrum. Ah. We couch it as an adult term called anger or an outburst or neurotic breakdown or some other stuff like that. But really, they are regressing to an earlier state, and it's has many reasons for that. But the point is that that behavior is not appropriate for the person of that age, right? That person should have developed and reached that age of maturity to handle that situation, but that behavior is not appropriate for the person of that age.
Or like a sibling who had a new baby in the family,
Yes.
and they start behaving
Yes.
like a baby
Classic.
sometimes because they don't like the attention the baby's getting.
Exactly. Classic. That's a classic example. But what I'm trying to impress upon you is don't leave it just at the kid stage, right? It can happen at any age. It can literally happen at any age. And that's why this whole progression of development is so crucial, that you have to develop correctly at each age so that you integrate that personality and you come into a whole integrated personality. Okay, next one.
Repression or denial. Pushing anxiety arousing thoughts into the unconscious. A person who witnesses his parents having sex is later unable to remember anything about the event.
Okay, so I don't know why these examples are all about sex, but I can tell you there is repression that happens in. Actually, I want to ask you, where have you seen it commonly happen, like repression? Where someone says, "Oh, I just can't remember it. It never happened. I can't remember."
Some traumatic event.
Exactly. That's a very classic example. Like someone has an accident and they are questioned about the details of the accident, and somehow there is one phase in time, like one block of time, which completely forgotten. Same thing with if someone has like an emergency surgery, for example, or like something really traumatic, or they watch someone dying, in a traumatic situation. A lot of people who survive like very traumatic like wars or catastrophic events, sometimes they just block it out. They block it out of their memory.
Or like childhood sexual abuse.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
big deal. It's a big
Yeah, it's repressed.
Yeah.
Now there is a big controversy about this repression. I have to tell you this. There's a big controversy because the way Freud couches this is that it is pushed into the unconscious. Okay? So psychologists don't completely agree with this whole concept of repression because I think maybe it was used in wrong ways by psychologists, in ways that wasn't actually repressed. So for example, take this childhood sexual abuse case. There was this bunch of cases that came into the public view, like I think in the 70s or 80s, about people reporting childhood abuse. And it was very confusing because the psychologists who would interview the people, would claim that that person spontaneously divulged that information in the session. But then some other people would question that, saying, what if you had planted those ideas in that person's mind? What if it actually wasn't a repressed thing and something that you suggested to that person, right? And that person in a vulnerable state just adopted that. So there's a lot of controversy there, but I still believe that there is some truth in this. There is some truth, it's just that it has to be used carefully, and like as a psychologist for me, I have to use it carefully with my clients and not just say, oh, you're repressing it. Oh yeah, it must have happened to you. Because if someone is denying something, you can't just poke at them and say, no, you're in denial, you're repressing it, it must have happened to you. And then you start, it's unethical, at that point to like plant ideas or memories into people's head. So anyway, that's just, so don't, let's take a word of caution, because if someone tells you that something's a repressed memory or whatever, just take it with a pinch of salt and look for corroborating evidence for it, right? If someone has a repressed memory of being sexually abused, then kind of work with that, acknowledge it, work with that, but look for some corroboration for it.
I have a very quick question. So, the way Freud puts it is that although that forgetfulness is there, it is accompanied by pushing into the blue part of the iceberg.
Yes.
Perhaps another way or another mechanism that could have happened is that it was a true forgetfulness, in the sense that it was just thrown away to the universe. It's not there in part of the big iceberg at all. Would that be?
Well, the thing is, there is no such thing. There is no such thing as forget. Like the brain doesn't forget. The brain encodes every experience. It is just the brain doesn't have, our brains don't have the capacity to remember and recall every single experience, although they say that in the right circumstances you are able to recall it. So again, the question is it, like you're saying, yeah, it's a completely valid point, is that that person may have forgotten or may have pushed it away and said, I don't want to think about it, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to think about it. But is it really buried in their unconscious? Because if it is in their unconscious, the difference between forgetting something and burying in the unconscious is that it is still acting on you in the unconscious. It is still affecting you. It's affecting your personality, your behavior, your reactions, and all of that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it depends on how significant that event was.
Yeah.
If it was very traumatic,
Yeah.
then it's definitely not going to be thrown out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus if it was relatively minor, I don't
Yeah.
know, would
Yeah.
it be thrown
Exactly. Yeah. Because if something doesn't carry an emotional valence for you, then you may not want to. It won't be there in your awareness. Some psychologists will say that these repressed memories are actually in the preconscious, because they're still acting on you. They're still affecting you. So part of it is in the preconscious, and most of it may be in the unconscious, and that's why for example, I have a friend who is very afraid of the dark and very afraid of being alone in her house. Like if her husband is traveling, she gets terrified and she has to go and sleep with a friend. why? I mean, I don't have that. You know, my husband was gone for 2 weeks, and of course my son was there. But even if both of them are gone, even if I'm alone at home, yeah, to some extent I am a little worried that, oh yeah, some burglars might break in. I check all the doors and latch everything, but I'm not terrified the way she is. So there's a question there. What is she repressed? But then she says that she had been burglarized twice, and she was traumatized by those 2 experiences. But that is still in her memory. But it is still acting on her unconsciously, like her fear is kind of, it's in her preconscious, she's kind of aware of it, but she's not able to change it.
So it's mostly in a negative way.
Yeah, that is in a negative way, yeah. So this we can go like very deep into this, right? So we'll move on. But good questions, good thoughts, because it's important to understand these things, because when you're dealing with even participants, right, their behaviors, observe their irrational behaviors. Observe what seems to you irrational is actually adaptive for them. They're using it to adapt to their environment, to adapt their unconscious mind, the conscious mind, and their environment all together, right? Do you understand what I'm saying?
The way I see it is, we all need to get on in life, right?
Yes.
And a long journey of like 70 years. So I think everybody needs, or I don't know needs, but everybody does it at least,
Yes.
to in some way survive the
Yes.
different things that are happening to us. So in some way I see all these things, maybe the examples aren't so good, but small things have happened to us, and then these are things that we do to
All the
survive
time.
and get through life. And as long as something is not strong enough, these are okay to some extent, I feel.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
So how
So
do you deal with things that happen on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
You need to repress, you need to forget, you need to move on.
yes. So the thing is, the reason I pointed that out is we tend to take a negative attitude when someone behaves irrationally, because we're like, that's a stupid guy. What is he saying? What is he doing? You know, we kind of get into this negative mode. But you have to understand, as therapists, like you are, even as yoga therapists, you have to understand that what seems irrational to you is something that's working for that person. That person is having to do that to survive, having to do that to negotiate life, to navigate through their life circumstances. So that empathy will come, and the curiosity will come. Okay, why are they doing that? So when you have that open-minded curiosity about why is that person being irrational, then you step away from the judgment mode, right? You step away from that place of judging them, and then you get into this place of curiosity, and then that's the only way that you can actually help them out of it. If you think that behavior is hurting them, then that's how you can help them out of it.
See, at the same time, that the therapist can tell that person that, look, you know, something bad happened to you when you were 8 years old. Now you're, you know, no, now say you're in the same room with that same person or somebody like that person who hurt you when you were 8 years old. But they cannot do the same thing to you, so you don't have to be afraid anymore.
That's classic CBT. That's
what?
Classic CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. You're shifting them cognitive. So we're getting into the treatment. So right, so you're getting into the treatment phase. So yeah, these are very important to understand, even if you want to treat that person, right? You have to really understand what's going on inside. Question?
Yeah, no, I want to say something, like whatever sticking to your brain, it's very hard to like let go. I grew up in a small village. In our village, if anybody died in that village, and that evening everybody, like for 10 days, everybody is going to say, oh, that person is going to come and meet you in the night. Oh my God, I was terrified like anything. Like in my teenage and from my childhood, then I got married, when my husband used to travel somewhere, the whole night house, he said, I'm not afraid of anybody. If the thief will come also, I'll say, well, hello. But I was always, that thing was sticking to my mind, like, oh, the ghost is going to come and, going to ask you or scare you or something. Like, after I have my daughter, then I shared with my husband. My husband told me, never say anything, like whatever, whoever passes away or anything, trauma, whatever you are having, never share with your daughter. Because one day she has to, stay alone. Then she should not carry that scary thing. But after I read, like, many books, there is no such things, but still somehow that thing is
still in my mind. Even, I'm trying to let go and all. I'm trying to stay alone. Or sometimes my husband is traveling, I'm staying alone and all. But still, somewhere in my mind, that thing is still there, but not like maybe 5% is there, 95% is gone. It's not like that. But how the childhood, whatever.
Very, very strong.
Yeah,
Very
the
strong.
childhood thing is very, very.
Yeah.
I think
Yes,
they have
very
that in
deep.
India, right? When somebody dies, till
Oh, yeah.
maybe
We're not
13
gonna
days
go
and-
there. So,
No,
so
go ahead. Just
we're
for
staying at.
sticking
So
to your mind.
this is what is this a repression? This is not exactly repression.
No, it's scary. Like you feel like scared. You don't know the truth. Like how there is somebody, I don't remember this. You see, I think Shriramji was saying something. You see in the dark room, you see the rope. You think it's a snake.
So which defense mechanism is that? This is a classic one. Rope and snake is there in all the Vedanta texts. Yoga texts, Vedanta texts. This is a classic Indian rope and snake analogy. Which defense mechanism is that? We've covered it.
Projection.
Yep. Projection. So you see someone as a bad person, right? That person is neither good nor bad. They are who they are. But you are projecting something that's in you onto them, right? Okay. So try to look at these things. So that way, when you look in your own life example about these things, you'll be able to connect. What kind of defense mechanism it is. Okay, moving on. Last one.
Sublimation. Channeling unacceptable sexual or aggressive desires into acceptable activities. A person participates in sports to sublime aggressive drives. A person creates music or art to sublimate sexual drives.
Yeah. So this is the only somewhat positive sounding defense mechanism that Freud came up with. Okay.
What does it read?
Sublimation. Sublimation. All right.
Kind of melt away.
Sublimate is camphor. Camphor sublimates.
Yeah, so it's melting
right?
away. Yeah.
It doesn't actually melt away. You have to light it. It won't melt
Yeah.
away on its own,
Of course,
right? You
yeah,
have to
yeah,
light it, and when you light it, it doesn't leave any residue.
Yes.
So this drive or this negative desire that you have, when you take that energy of that drive and that desire and you put it into something else, ideally there should not be any residue of that desire, right? So you're sublimating it into a positive activity.
Is that like the Kundalini is directed? Any comparisons for that?
Well, is the Kundalini a bad thing? Is it a bad desire?
No, it's just so you challenge whatever it is, whether it's good or bad. You challenge it in a more positive way versus channeling it in a.
Yeah, it can apply to anything. In this case, you're basically focused on conflict resolution. Something is in you that's conflicting with your values and with your goals, and you have this conflicting desires or drives that's coming up, and you want to channel that. Okay?
Can I think of one more example? So somebody who's very aggressive, like what is given here, they join the army.
Yeah.
And like a Kshatriya, they feel good that they're doing some dharmic activity because.
That's exactly it. I mean, here he gives an example of sports. It's the same thing with sports, army. Yeah, exactly. So what I'm going to have you guys do is, this is a really important one. That's why I'm spending a lot of time on this. And I don't even know how much more I can cover because I'm only given like an hour and a half each time. Last time I used to have the 4-hour slot, right? Adina was there in those sessions. So I could go deep and work with you guys on this. But anyway, what I'll do is I want you to come up with one example of someone employing this in your life. Someone you have seen employ a defense mechanism, any one of these, pick any one, and quickly give that example to share it with a partner. Okay, just 1 minute. You have to literally think for 1 minute, condense it into 1 minute, and share it. Okay, and then switch. So literally 2 minutes for this exercise. Then the next part of the exercise is think of a defense mechanism that you have employed to relieve your own anxiety or your own conflicts. That's a harder one. And share that. So first, think of someone else. They're very easy. You have a lot of irrational people in your life. Share that, and then yours. So total should not take more than 5 minutes, and then I'm going to cut it off wherever it is. Okay, we really have to move on. All right. Pick a partner and get going. Why are you doing that? Oh, we need a bigger screen, right? Why don't we move this one?
So regression, right? I go off my parents' house, I go back to New York, I mean, not. I can never back to.
I should think of regression. I do that to be
Now, of course, they would
sometimes kids, baby, and then they'll have older child come on. And normally, before the baby is arrived, maybe 5 years old age appropriate, right? But
You can just sit closer to
after the baby has come, the mom
Okay, you have 4 minutes. 4 minutes, so start sharing, please.
or the moment you have to feed the baby, the child is complete. So that's like a regressive behavior. So he wants the child to spend one of the things that I've seen, especially more in rationalization, especially in this very politically conflicted environment. So I won't really say it's negative behaviors, but people hold their positions, and whenever then they try to justify it. Yeah, they try to justify it. So no amount of logic can dislodge their position, and they try to.
You all have partners.
I mean, in my mind, it appears as if they're looking up for logic in order to hold it.
Or you don't have a partner.
It's very common. Conflicting thing, but
It's going slowly, because
that's
people
it's a self-preservation thing.
is going slowly. Last time I think that's why I slowed down. First class, I think I just did too much, right?
And it wasn't just that.
This card that's picture, right?
That is material.
It's hard to put your foot into another culture. This is a completely alien culture for us, right? And they also struggle to understand us. It's very interesting. Like our kids kind of go through this.
Okay, this is easy.
Switch.
People can do that, right?
It happens all the time, yeah. Family members. These are easy ones, but there's so much more
Self-analyze
depth.
behavior.
Like if you want to go,
So
so for example, if
plus, out of that whole vast
parents have been critical of
everything,
you,
each of us has done
then you
everything at
absorb
some point.
that, and then you become critical of your kids, right? But you don't even realize where it's coming from. You think that that's how I'm supposed to be. And it's so powerful. It's really so powerful. It's very, very powerful. If you just talk about being empathic and being in witness mode and being this and being that, all bullshit. Because if you don't go into the unconscious mind and remove all the crap that's there, you are not fully present in the present. There is, like, actually, Freud had a very good point about how much crap is under the surface, right? Especially in Western society. I find that they this thing.
Yeah.
So I
They don't know, you don't know, but it'll still affect you. You don't, but what you do is, you notice their behavior, and the therapist will kind of guide you through the theories. Like he has his theories, and you say, what is your parents' personality? You know, like if you know your parents' personality, however they behaved when you were 3, it's the same they would have behaved when you were 6. So you kind of correlate that, and that's how you get it. There's many different techniques. Time's up! Time's up! Time's up! Let's regroup.
My son is in charge of taking care of the dog, is taking care of. He's doing all this. In the morning, before he goes to college, he's
Was anyone able to learn something about themselves that they didn't know?
I can see all of them in the
See all of them?
probably picked her out or something.
And we are staring me and Malaji staring like before I used to, when I was pretty young, if somebody said something, I used to very much, why that person said something, that is that person's fault and all these things. But after later after I started
So wait, stop there. What defense mechanism is that?
that is the no,
Regression?
no.
Regression is like you're behaving in a way that's not appropriate to your age, behaving in a younger age, right? So you said, if someone said something to you, you're like, that's a bad person. Why are they saying that? What is that? What defense mechanism is that?
Denial.
Reaction formation?
Maybe. But it's a classic projection.
Reaction maybe.
Could be reaction formation. Could be reaction formation. But typically it's projection. Because what happens is that it's a very subtle process. If you follow step by step, that person says something to you. What he said is actually true. It triggers discomfort in you. Oh, he said something true, but it's something bad about me, or something that I'm not comfortable with myself. And that reaction, you're not unable to bear that anxiety that it creates, the conflict that it creates. It cannot be true. What he said cannot be true. That person is saying something untrue, bad person. Okay? Alright. So you can see the subtlety of this, right? This you can take it to a very subtle extent. Alright. So we'll move on. Was there any questions about this? Any concerns? I spent a lot of time on this for a good reason. And I'm going to talk to Ashwini and see if we can, come up with some exercise for you guys to do. Because this is pretty important.
Can I add one thing? Is this supposed to be an exhaustive
No.
list of defense mechanisms?
Very good question. No, it's not. It's not. And even the examples also, there's so many layers of subtleties within each of these defense mechanisms that you can, come up with all kinds of examples for it. And it's not exhaustive. So you can Google search and you will find different lists. But it's kind of the most common ones that I brought up here.
Also, any case studies that you can share if you have, if there are any such things.
I'll look
how,
for it.
or how,
Again,
I don't know
I'm
what kind I don't know what I'm looking for, but something.
No, I get what you're saying, because all my textbooks have case studies. I just don't know what the copyright issues are with respect to that. So maybe what I can do is I can take them and create my own, and just create my own scenarios, and I have to type it up and and share that. Yeah.
They will be more clear because there are so many layers, what kind of.
You don't have to know all the layers. The thing, what I'm trying to tell you.
But I mean, it's not exactly clear that in this situation Confusion could be projection, it could be reaction, or what it could be. So case studies will help us to understand it more.
Again, there is the manifest content and latent content, and then there is the content and process. So I wanna make you guys understand this. Is there a board I can write on? No, never mind. Never mind.
Then I
Shiraji always has something. You want to create
but
like
there's
a new
only one-
slide? But don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Yeah. So we will figure it out for the next class. Okay. Now there's something called content and process. Okay. What that means is, someone is telling you something, right? And you are listening to what they're saying, the words. That's the content. The process is the meaning you are taking from that. And that meaning can have many layers. So you take the literal meaning of what they're saying, and then you process it. You think about, oh, why are they saying that? Then even there might be an obvious reason why they're saying it, and then there might be some other hidden reasons why they're saying it. So that is the process. Now I've shared these defense mechanisms with you, right? What I want you to do is I want you to take this as the content and then use your own process it in your own way, and understand it in that way. Like you process it and try to understand the subtlety of any interaction. You don't have to label it. It's not important whether you label it or whether you label it correctly. I really want you to get into the subtlety of understanding the process of all these different, just understand the basics. The basics is that there is a conflict in here that person is not able to bear, and they're doing something. They're employing some tactic, some behavior to reduce that conflict. Okay, so keep that in mind, and then look at behaviors, or look at your own behavior. Actually, I would start with here, your own behaviors and your own thought processes, and then look at other people who are close to you, get an idea of what they're doing. And it's okay if you label it wrongly. What I'm looking for is that step-by-step analysis that I just did with Gitanjali, right? He says something, this is what the emotion it creates, this is the conflict it created, and this conflict cannot be borne, and how that conflict gets resolved by pushing it back onto that other person. I want that step-by-step analysis rather than whether you named it correctly as projection or not. Understand? Okay.
Can I ask? I'll make it very quick because I don't want to take too much time. But the reason why I asked whether it was exhaustive was there was one event that I was recalling that happened to one of my friends who responded, who was trying to defend from an attack, like people were accusing him of something. So he responded to the situation none of these ways,
Yeah.
but the way he responded was he became, or when the insults or the accusations were thrown at him, he donated some thousands of dollars to some charity, and he did so many altruistic things that that was his way of defending himself.
Deflection.
Like how would we label that?
Displacement.
Displacement?
Yeah. Remember, I'm Freud. I'm not Savitha, right? I'm Freud. So Freud will not have anything kind of warm and fuzzy. He's not warm and fuzzy and cuddly. Okay, he's brutal in that way. So he will say, yes, it is a defense mechanism. That person was accused of whatever, and there is created discomfort and conflict in him. He's trying to resolve that conflict by assuring himself that he's a good person, and he engages in these good activities. Okay, there's nothing altruistic. Okay.
So two things. He's trying to change his own image in other people's mind, A. Or B, is he guilty of whatever? He feels guilty that he maybe really was doing what they accused him, and then he's trying
It doesn't matter. It's all about discomfort. It's all about inner conflict. Whatever the conflict may be, whether he's conflicted because his beloved friends think he's a bad person, or whether he's actually a bad person and feeling guilty, all of that is inner conflict. How he is resolving that inner conflict is through these actions. Okay? Right. So no warm and fuzzy, and he's very brutal that way. Okay, now things didn't end with Freud. A lot of people came after him who developed the field, and in very important ways. Like there are a lot of psychologists in Austria, Switzerland, Germany, England. It's mostly Western Europe, so you have to kind of confine this to Western Europe. And then the field actually spread across, because you have to understand that all these countries colonized several countries in the world, and they brought this with them along with a bunch of other garbage. But I'm not saying this is garbage, but they brought a lot of other garbage, but they brought this also with them. So it still developed primarily in the Western European context, and so there are quite a few other psychologists. There was Alfred Adler, who calls himself a Freudian, and then a neo-Freudian, meaning new. Like, he took Freud's ideas and he built on it based on his experience. And then Karen Horney put a sort of a woman's perspective into it, because Freud was only treating neurotic women, and this whole concept of neurotic women comes from Freud, where he would be like, if a woman is hysterical or is like, going through like breaking down, then it became like a woman's thing, without understanding that it was a society that was sort of oppressing the women and creating this neurosis in them. So she wanted to look at the same, she kind of accepted a lot of his theories, but she wanted to look at it from the woman's perspective. Then there was another neo-Freudian called Erik Erikson, who came up with psychosocial stages of development. This is not like Geetaji is nodding. You probably learned this in child psychology,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. So now nobody really pays too much attention to the oral, anal, phallic, and genital and all that stuff, right? So this is the one that's most popularly used. So what Erikson said is that it's not sexual. Let's not go to the sexual direction. Let's go in the social direction, because children are integrated into society as they grow up, right? That whole process of developing a child is to integrate that child effectively into the society that they are living in. And again, you have to understand that this psychosocial stages of development is from the Western model, the Western concept. So starting with infancy here, where in infancy, what Erikson says is that trust and mistrust are the basic things that the child has to develop. Remember, I was telling you about the baby. When the baby cries and the mom responds, the baby's non-verbal. Again, the baby has non-verbal intelligence. That baby's intelligence is saying, the world is a trustworthy place. I can trust the world. Because when I am in distress, when I cry, there is a response. Now, animals don't progress, beyond that stage. They kind of stay in that infant stage, because they're still in the instinctual realm. Cognitively, they don't progress. But humans do progress cognitively. So once that trust phase has been established, then the child moves into the early childhood phase, where they are trying to gain autonomy. And if they don't gain that autonomy, they end up having shame and doubt. So again, it's a conflict. Every development stage has a conflict, and that conflict has to be transcended and effectively integrated and transcended, and only then that child has developed correctly, according to this theory.
So I have a question regarding infancy, trust versus mistrust. Like when the baby you put to sleep and he wants you to hold to put to sleep, and you say, okay, now he's going to have a habit, and let him cry. So is that trust, mistrust? It will be in
the only way to answer your question is, imagine you're the baby. What do you want?
He wants to be held, held. So that means I will be holding again. More comfort.
What is conducive to that baby's well-being at that moment? Right?
Because they get used to them. They want to hold all the time.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
I'll leave it at
that's
that.
good. I got my answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So then in early childhood, the child is, so the phases are like 18 months to 3 years, right? So they're like, even before they start preschool. At that point, they start separating themselves from the parents. Like they No, when the very young babies have what Freud called oceanic feeling, meaning they don't really see the separation between themselves and another person. They don't even know their own bodies. Like you'll see this baby, will be like the hand will come here, and the baby's so curious, like, wow, what is this? It's his own hand, right? And then he's like, oh, I can move this hand. I have free will to move this hand, and I can suck this thumb. And they have this, they're developing that sense of who they are. But once they reach a certain age, they know that they are separate. They start separating, but they are emotionally still entangled with the mother, because when the baby cries, they want that mother to hold that, to provide that empathy and provide the environment to soothe the baby. The baby has not developed capacity to self-soothe, to soothe themselves. So until they develop that capacity to self-soothe, they're dependent on the mother to soothe them. So that is where the trust builds up, right? And then they come to the stage of early childhood where they gain the autonomy to do their own, they want to do their own stuff. They want to sort of individuate from the mother. And if they are not allowed to do their own things, they start feeling inadequate. They start feeling that shame, that, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. Then they go to the preschool stage where they taking more initiative to take care of themselves, to be independent, to be their own thing. And if they are thwarted, if they are prevented, they start feeling guilty that I am not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So that develops that shame and guilt from very early age. So you can see how at a very young age they have identified that these characteristics develop, these tendencies develop. Then they come to the school age where they are then have to deal with industry versus inferiority. What does industry mean? Industry means, imagine a school age kid. The school age kid has to do their homework, study whatever the teacher tells them. They have to show participation in class and all of that, things that the school age kids do. They have to be industrious. Again, this goes back to Western European cultural norms of how they raise the children. And this may be very different from the way we raise kids in India, but then we have to critically look at what is adaptive for a kid in that environment. For example, a kid growing up in deep Amazon jungle, they're not going to go through these phases because their needs are different. Their psychosocial needs are different. So the psychosocial development patterns are different. So they go through this phase of industry versus inferiority, and if they are not able to show their value, and if they're not able to show results at that age, they feel they're inferior. The inferiority complex kind of sets in at that age. So it's very important to make them feel a sense of mastery, a sense of agency and mastery. That's very important at that age. And that's still a very tender age of like 5 to 13 years old. Then they come into adolescence. Identity is the main thing in adolescence. The identity, they're forming their own unique individual identity. And it's very, very important to allow that stage to go through its normal process instead of parents forcing a certain identity on them. So it's a tricky balance, it's a tricky negotiation that has to happen. And the reason I'm presenting this to you is because you will see these conflicts in the kids that come to you, for kids classes, for therapy, and you'll see these conflicts in parents, and parents unable to understand what stage of development they're in and how to support them in that stage of development. What does a kid need? And that's how I answered Urmila's question, is like, what does a baby want? It's not what you want that baby to do. It's like as a parent, you are trying to program that baby's behavior. But what does a baby need to develop in its own natural environment? And then the young adulthood, there is intimacy and isolation. If they don't form intimate connections, like with partners, spouses, and formation of family, there is a sense of isolation. And that's a very big problem in society today, actually, with a lot of divorces and a lot of single people, and it is an issue because that has not been resolved. Middle adulthood, they start getting what's called generativity versus stagnation. So what is generativity? Generativity is a classic thing where once you've gone through the stage, say these earlier stages, and you've acquired some wealth, you've acquired knowledge and skills, you feel like you want to contribute back to society, right? Everybody gets, I mean, most people get to that stage and they're like, okay, I'm comfortable, I got everything, everything's in control, now what can I do for society? A lot of us who volunteer and who, do stuff. It's also passing down the culture to the next generation, like people who have some very unique skills. Like I was watching on TV the other day, this guy who has a very unique way of making green tea in China, in Hangzhou province. And apparently it was handed down over the last 500 years, so several generations. And he desperately wants to pass it on to the younger people. And he's saying that I can't find younger people to come and learn it from me. Why would he care? He can say, hey, I'll make my green tea and I'll sell, I'll make my money, I'll live my life, and then I'll die and I'll go. No, but there is this intrinsic need for him to keep that continuity. It is a need. What I describe it as an intrinsic need for immortality. Like that is a way in which you think that I can be immortal if I pass this on and this continues after me. And then in the late age is ego integrity versus despair. So ego integrity is where you feel like I have lived a good life. I did what I had to do. I made good choices, and now I'm whole and I'm ready to to move on, or that you feel like it was worthwhile, that you lived a life that was worthwhile. If you don't, then you get into all these questions like, oh, what did I do with my life? And my life is a whole failure. And because you don't have a tomorrow, right? You don't have, like right now we're sitting here, if you're in your 40s and 50s and saying, oh, I have another 20 years. I can still fix my life. I can still fix the things that I did wrong. But when you're 80, you don't have much wiggle room to fix what you did wrong. You can't start a new career at that point. You can't create family at that point, right? So then you despair. So that is a conflict. So these are the two conflicts that need to be resolved at each of those levels. Does that make sense? Yes? Okay. So I will just stop here because the next topic is basically starts with Carl Jung. And Jung is absolutely fascinating. Have you read Jung? You haven't read Jung? You have to read Carl Jung. So he is another student of Freud, and I'll just give a teaser. He's also a Swiss psychiatrist. Freud is Austrian, and he was more like a philosopher. And in the beginning, he was very much lock and step with Freud. Like he thought of Freud as his mentor, and he studied with him. He kind of worked with him. Then he started developing sort of diverging. His ideas started morphing into a different direction. And he, of course, disagreed with Freud on his overemphasis on sexuality, which a lot of other neo-Freudians disagreed with. And he came up with these fascinating concepts of the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. Absolutely fascinating. And then he came up with these concepts of the archetypes. Blew my mind when I read him. And for him, he was more focused on he had a more positive view. Like Freud said, there's no such thing as free will. Everything is driven by your unconscious mind. It's all the garbage that you have. But he was like, no, there is some wiggle room here. No, there is a way, there is a path, a way to get out of this rut of being driven by the unconscious mind. And he called that process the process of individuation and self-realization. And keep in mind that his idea of self-realization is not the same as what we call self-realization. It's slightly different, but he came close to it. He basically studied a lot of Eastern philosophy, studied yoga, and he read about it. He traveled extensively, unlike Freud. He traveled extensively to Eastern countries, and also I think he went to Africa. He visited many different cultural settings, right? So his theories, he kept challenging his theories every time. Like I talked about external validity. So you go to another country and you have this concept that this is the way you have to do it. And you go to another country and they do it completely differently. And you're like, whoa, they must be all messed up because they're living differently. But wait, they're not. They're actually living quite prosperously. How do they do that? Right? So that we have that. And if you're curious, then you can kind of look at it from their point of view. It's like, okay, I am a Samoan tribal. What do I need to survive in my environment, to thrive? And how do I live? And how do I think? And you know, what issues do I face? And how do I develop? How do I raise my kids? And very different, right? So it's almost like you're shifting your mind. So he did that. He did that a lot with many different cultures. And but then he also looked for patterns. There's something common. There's some patterns. We all do that. We all find these patterns, like when we move around in society and we look at, classic example is like parenting. You know, everybody wants their children to grow up and everybody wants their children to thrive, and there's like, you know, they say motherhood and apple pie are like very classic American values, right? So there are patterns in how people raise kids. But then he also saw patterns in religion, in culture, in myths, in beliefs. And so he saw all these patterns, and he came up with his own Jungian philosophy and of Jungian psychology, of analytical psychology. So I will do that next time. But this time I will just close with this and we will say the mantra. Unless there's any questions, any
Just one
big burning questions.
Not question, but do you have a recommended book that we can read? It's just called Carl Jung.
On Jung? Carl Jung?
What's the name of the book that?
I read.
Or you could email it to us also.
See, the problem is these books are a little difficult to understand unless you. I'm trying to think if someone has written about Carl Jung. Let me take that as homework.
Yeah, that would be good too, because reading his original work
Exactly.
would take a long time and I would get bored, I guess. halfway
Yeah,
through
it
if I
is
don't
hard to understand. His
Something
original
short,
work.
but then deeper than what is given here.
Exactly. Yeah. So I will look for that. I'll look for that and I'll share that I'll take that as an action item for me. Okay. All right. Just to survey momentum. Oh.